Jim Joyce. This is the
Hey.
longest ever season 9 because we just been missing and skipping, and the whole premise of us getting through the
Right,
week while we were locked up in one
right,
place was great.
right,
Now I feel like you cheating on me, I'm cheating on you, getting out to other people, podcast galore. You're
right. We're
talking
kind
about
of
numbers.
the kids. We're like kids, like kind of all of a sudden now we're being let out, running around conferences,
Exactly.
talking. And
But
what? Tell me. What? Tell me.
no, I was gonna say, but the show must go on, even though maybe not as consistently as we would like, but
Right.
the
I
show
agree.
must go on.
Right. The world needs a shot of digital health. Once a week
Yeah,
is the prescribed behavior, but we've been unable to adhere to that.
yeah, exactly. In as far as the news, because we're so scrounged on time, I haven't
Sure.
seen anything out there. The only thing that I just flashed, I just went to LinkedIn and I opened up. So congrats to the 9 a.m. health team, Frank and team, the ex My Sugar founders that just raised 16 million bucks.
Wow.
For diabetes patients. So congrats, and our friends at Seven Wire co-led the round. So
Okay.
yeah, that's honestly,
Fantastic.
like, literally I just saw this like 5 minutes ago, and I love the team, and so that's awesome stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have much going on. I mean, I just wondered, like, is there, I still listen to, Jessica and our
And
friend
Matt, yeah, Matthew Holt,
Matt's,
yeah.
kind of updating the news. The news kind of feels like it's kind of morphing together for me. It just seems like there's probably so much activity that the big deals kind of don't feel like big anymore. Or sometimes they do. Maybe it's just I'm just distracted.
You know what? We can chat with Joe Connolly, who's going to join us. I'm going to let him in
Right.
because he's
Perfect.
also kind of, not that he's tracking every deal, but I think he'll have some good stuff to talk about. We just had a whole discussion with a banker where the spigot, is it open still with these crazy
Right.
valuations or not? But anyway, we can once we introduce Joe. Joe, welcome.
Hey, Joe.
Hey James, how are you both?
So
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Jim meet Joe, Joe meet Jim. Good to have you finally on the Shot of Digital Health. Welcome.
Yeah,
Hey.
I'm glad you made the time for me. Great to meet you, Jim.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Joe. I'm looking forward to hearing about Visana. Oh, I said that right, Visana.
You nailed it.
Awesome.
But before we
Awesome.
yeah, I know that's a tough one, right? Visana, yeah. I think it sounds like it's spelled, right? Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, Joe, I don't know. I mean, we've certainly met on Twitter and always enjoyed the commentary, and then, we had a number of calls, and like the premise of this show is that it's, somebody from mine or Jim's network, and we just shoot the shit every Wednesday, right? So that's the beauty of it, meticulously unproduced. So welcome, Joe, and for the millions of viewers and listeners, give us a little bit of your background, kind of, and however you want to, tell it. No,
No rules.
no
Yeah,
rules.
so like you, Eugene, I came from a large med device corporation. So not pharma, but med device. And I'm sure we have lots of trials and tribulations that we could share of how hard it is to innovate within a large company. And so I was doing a little bit of strategy work, a little bit of portfolio development and M&A. And then back in 2014, 2015, people kind of came to me and said, hey, this digital health thing is, starting to get hot. I was the person that people would go to internally when they didn't really know, and they had this big, hairy, ambiguous problem, and I could go try to tackle it and figure it out. And so that was how I originally got into the digital health space more broadly. And I had a really successful project while I was at this company where we scaled a digital health company to about 20 or 30 different hospitals. And I saw the power that digital health solutions could bring in terms of massively improving patient outcomes, especially when you align different stakeholder incentives. And so this particular product was in the wound care space. And I have this story that really stuck out in my mind about how one guy who is in his 40s had had a venous ulcer for 20 years, and it was really debilitating his life. And we got his ulcer healed within 6 months by driving him to proper care. And he was just so incredibly thankful. We had lots of one-on-one conversations with him. He would tell us about how he could run up the hill again with his kids, and he'd never
Wow.
been able to do that before. He was considering having his leg amputated. And my North Star has always been about improving patient outcomes. And I saw, it didn't really matter if you were using our stent or a competitor stent, they were basically the same thing at the end of the day. And that getting the right patient, the right care at the right time was really what we needed to do to improve healthcare outcomes. And so that's how I got in the virtual care space more broadly, and then decided to apply that skill set that I had learned to conditions that impacted my mom, my aunt, my grandma. So what Visana Health does is we focus on women's health conditions outside of the fertility and maternity continuum. And so these are conditions like endometriosis, uterine fibroids. And to give you a little flavor about how these conditions impact people's lives, my mom had such excruciating pain when she was on her period that she'd be vomiting for 3 or 4 days out of every single month. And she just could not get any semblance of care for the better part of 3 decades, like just was dismissed and told that it was a normal part of being a woman. And so basically I took that professional experience that I had along with, what had happened to my family members and founded Visana out of that.
Amazing.
And did this company you work for have a name, the one before?
It was
You're
Boston Scientific.
out of, I was going to say, you're out of your
Great
NDA.
company. Yes, it's a great company.
Okay, Boston Scientific. Yeah, I thought it was with the stents and the.
Yeah.
And so you were based out of Boston?
I'm based out of Minneapolis. Actually, the majority of Boston Scientific is based out of Minneapolis from acquisitions. So it's MedTech Central up here.
I love Minneapolis. Big fan of Minneapolis. And do you know our buddy John Brownlee?
I do know
look at
John,
that.
and I usually love Minneapolis too, but it's snowing today and it's mid-April. So this is the time of year I hate Minneapolis and I question why I live here.
I was going to say come to Barcelona, but it's actually cold and rainy, which they lied to us when they told us come to Barcelona. It's nice and warm, right? So
yeah, it's spring. It's spring in Dublin. Come by for a pint of Guinness in Dublin here.
Yeah, I would love
tapas.
that.
Before we get deeper into Visana, and absolutely, I joke around. I think people heard me say it, like I lost most of my hair during the pharma days, even though that's not true, but pushing kind of non-molecular therapies in the molecular world. But, kind of back up, how did you even get into the kind of the strategy role? And then I actually want to switch to coming out of the big company, how does what that taught you being an entrepreneur, right? And of course, working with, what you helped scale right across. So first, how did you get into the strategy work?
Yeah, I got lucky, to be 100% honest. So I was in graduate school at Duke and talked to the right person at a career fair who brought me in and liked me. And so I did an internship at Boston Scientific initially, and I think just did a really good job and then landed the role, continued to work while I was finishing grad school, and then started full-time right after that. So to be 100% honest, just dumb luck.
And kind of business, were you in business or some kind of medical grad school, or what were you studying?
I was studying biomedical engineering. So my degrees are both in engineering, and I have done 0 engineering since I graduated with those degrees.
I bet if you did an analysis, Eugene, if you did like a survey of like top, kind of digital health execs, biomechanical engineers would be like way up there.
Yeah, I think it's people that love the medical side of things, and then they love to build things. So it kind of it's a natural fit.
Like 3 of my top executives have that kind of degree. So every time I hear that, I'm always like, oh, great, come work for Health Beacon.
Small world.
That's interesting. I actually never thought of it that way, but I guess, I'm just thinking to myself, like I got tech background too, right? Before even getting into healthcare, right? So I joke around. I mean,
the kind of engineering.
Yeah, like I coded systems, infrastructure stuff, but I don't remember. I'm not even good enough to be dangerous at all now.
You fire the podcast up in like 4 minutes, like your podcast, this will go right away.
I have this pretty automated. I just press end and then the rest happens, right? Like I got a chat, the AI that does the text. I wish it did, but it is meticulously produced. So I don't pay any attention to the few lines that we do, But back to Joe. So luck is part of it, and we always say it's hard work and a little bit of luck, right? Or the reverse. And what were like a lesson that you took out of scaling, basically a startup / company, I guess spin off, spin out, however you look at it.
The wound care product, yeah.
The wound care, which our friend Chris Henderson, we need to actually get him. He's still in wound care, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think some lessons out of that is Boston Scientific, in my view, was very payer focused or very health system focused. And we were trying to focus on the incentives of those stakeholders and making sure that we had a win from a sales proposition. So I learned a lot about what those stakeholders are looking for, how they're evaluating products. And I think that's been really instrumental to Visana's success so far, because I can speak the language and know how to talk to these people. I think the thing that I was very shocked by was how hard it was to get patients to engage in digital products. I think that's where we really struggled. And I think it's because we were taking too hard on the B2B side of things and we weren't focusing on the end user and the consumer enough. And so that was a really big takeaway for me from that experience, is that you really have to be focused on the end user to be able to really drive engagement, which is ultimately a surrogate for the value that your product is bringing. Because if people don't use it, then there's no value there.
I think you just in one comment, like, just summarize the challenge of scaling digital healthcare companies. It's like, the idea that a small organization could maintain this incredibly, kind of nuanced enterprise selling capability, to navigating a big organization, and at the same time, compete with the best consumer technology out there. Like, it's just, isn't that the problem?
Yeah. It's really hard. And I think some people lean too hard on the consumer side of things. And then when they try to cross the chasm into the enterprise, they don't have a clear enough value statement to drive adoption. And then others go too hard on the enterprise and don't have a compelling enough consumer value proposition to drive any adoption on the consumer side. So it's really hard to be able to marry those two things up in a really clean way.
What's your secret for tackling the enterprise or the bigger organization?
So I was lucky enough at Boston Scientific to know a lot of those stakeholders. And like I said, we were mapping out all their different product adoption pathways and really trying to understand what are the key fundamental business drivers of how they're evaluating products. And should be obvious, but they're evaluating them monetarily. So you can bring clinical value, you can bring patient satisfaction value, but ultimately you need a monetary value statement to those enterprises to really drive adoption. And so I think that is the most important thing on that side, that people, especially ones that don't have a lot of healthcare experience, have a lot of learnings about, what are the incentives? How do people actually make money? And how do those things all align? Because even if you're bringing a lot of value to patients, that doesn't mean that an enterprise is going to care about you at all, unfortunately.
Right.
Before we kind of let you in, we just started talking about, the news cycle, and it seems like, these 100+ million deals, maybe not dried up completely, but certainly, the spigot seems to be closing. And you're one of the few entrepreneurs, Joe, that I've been kind of watching. You've been just hacking away, to a certain extent, bootstrapping. I think you guys just recently did a round. I don't remember the dynamics of it, but your thoughts and observation, because you're also keen on, the channels and the reimbursements and the engagement strategies. And so I've been, enjoying watching and participating in the discussions with you, at least online, but I'll pause.
I've got a lot of thoughts on this. I have a blog post that's coming out here. So I think that there are, not every company, and this isn't me trying to undermine any of those large funding rounds, but I think we saw a lot of people that raised a lot of money at very extraordinarily high valuations that they might have been able to drive really strong consumer adoption and be able to show that there's a demand on the consumer side. I think what I struggle with on pure direct to consumer business models is I think the margins are really going to erode over time, because I don't think there's very much defensibility. And so I think as those large funding rounds came out, I think we started to see more and more competitors pop up in the spaces where there were those large funding rounds. And now all of a sudden your customer acquisition cost from the direct to consumer side of things is just going to explode. And so everybody is now trying to figure out, well, if the funding is going to dry up, then we're going to have to figure out the B2B side of things and figure out how to get in network or how to sell to self-funded employers. And those channels, like I said, you can't simply just push a direct to consumer product over into the B2B channels just because you're getting good outcomes and patient engagement. There's a lot more to those sales channels than that. And so I take the approach that defensibility is going to be the right long-term play. And even though it takes a very long time and it's very hard to be successful in those B2B engagements, that embedding yourself within the broader healthcare ecosystem, both the payers and the providers, is going to be really critical for business success in the long term.
So you see defensibility as integrating and embedding yourself with the payer and provider. Is that?
I think those
right?
and it depends. Some people are just taking standard fee for service contracts, right? So they're taking a provider contract, maybe getting Medicare rates. Again, I think that's not a very high margin business at the end of the day, and they're being valued at SaaS multiples with a company that have very high margins when you don't necessarily have those margins. And so I think there's a little bit of dissonance there between the margins of the business and the ultimate valuation. And I think people kind of saw it as a land grab where, if we just pump a bunch of money into this company, that they'll be able to drive patient volumes in a way that is going to be defensible. But I'm not sure if that's true, especially when a lot of the services that are being offered people are basically selling the prescriptions and the drugs more than the medical care and the care model, which at that point it's a commodity because you're just pushing a drug and people can shop against, who's going to be able to provide me the most cost-effective service. And then that's a race to the bottom.
And just before we get maybe or not deeper into the whole payer and engagement and all of that, something interesting you said around DTC, and that's another topic that I know we had a discussion here with Chris Hogg, and I know, Joe, you were part of it, kind of the Legos of healthcare and being able to in today's world, literally just take, Wheel or SteadyMD or Open Loop, right, for docs, selfish promotion of health coaches in the box, right? Many, credentialing service, and literally assemble all the puzzle pieces, get 100 million round, and I'm picking a random number, and then, do your CAC, right? Advertise the shit out of the service direct to consumer, and then service it via this. Now, to your point, what's ultimately the defensibility there, right? In that direct to consumer model. I'm just trying to play in with the Legos component and your thoughts on it.
100%. I mean, some companies are basically just a really thin UX that drives customer acquisition, and then everything else on the back end is completely outsourced. And so the value then becomes your marketing, which is easily copyable because everything else has been outsourced. And then those Legos, everybody else can use too. So there's no barrier to entry there at the end of the day. And it's actually lowered the cost to start a new company in the space because you can, slap together hundreds of thousands of dollars and, be off the ground in a couple states fairly easily.
Yep. That's great. Yeah. And what when you think about, so you think about kind of really building out your tech stack in a really meaningful way. Is that part of it so that you kind of own the full puzzle pieces?
Yeah, I think from a tech perspective, the way that we really view ourselves is we are trying to drive a really differentiated care model. So we are a healthcare company at the core, and the technology is a wrapper that enables the care model that we want to be built. Despite the fact that there are all these building blocks, I still don't think that they're there in the level of maturity that we want them to be at. And I think we're taking a little bit of a differentiated care model because we're trying to provide longitudinal and continuous care for people with chronic conditions. So we want people to see the same doctor every single time. We want people to, we want to follow up at certain time points to check how people are doing, provide a lot of asynchronous care that's very customized based on the patient's condition and based on their care plan, and get them funneled back into our clinical algorithms when necessary. And so I think a lot of the companies out there can be transactional in nature, where it's, I want this prescription, I get the prescription, and then they're generating revenue from delivering that prescription to someone's door. And we are really trying to build a care model where the product is the care and not the prescription.
Have you heard this thing? You ever heard this term Spoonie?
Spoonie, I haven't heard of that, no.
You haven't heard about that? It's kind
I don't
of
think I've heard it either.
It's for
I've
people
heard
that are in
spooning, but that's, I think, different.
I don't, maybe I was watching the wrong TikTok video, but it's for people that have chronic pain. I just seen it because we've hired these patient ambassadors recently in my company, and I see them referring they're referring to each other as like, so people that are suffering from long-term chronic pain. Maybe I have this right. We have to check this out. We have to check this out whether I'm quoting it correctly. But I was thinking you would know about what a spoonie was. I've been dying to ask someone.
I have heard of it. Yeah. Now that you say that, it's 100% right. It's like they refer to themselves those ways. It's like a nickname.
Okay, got it. Okay,
Jim, but don't worry, we're meticulously unproduced, and this is the fake news channel of digital health. So
right. So how have you found the funding market? in terms of raising capital? Because I hear people talking about, other than unless you're Eugene, it's always a slog, like he just, he snaps his finger and money
Oh
flows
yeah,
at
of
him.
course, yeah, yeah. Just like everybody else.
How have you found it? I've always found it. I've raised a lot of money in my time for different companies, and I think from the outside, it's like your Facebook photos, like your life looks great. On the inside, you're like you're like a duck flapping in water. How have you found it?
The exact way that you just described it. I mean, it's despite the fact that you're seeing all these hundreds of $1 million raises, I don't think that's the experience of a normal entrepreneur, so to speak. I think some of these people, particularly second-time entrepreneurs and people that have had really big exits, have found it easier to raise in this type of environment. But for first-time entrepreneurs who are still getting their feet underneath them, I think that's where it can be a little bit more difficult. And I think the money just being showered down from the heavens is not what is actually happening on the ground for the vast majority of people.
Good to hear, because good to hear, because I was wondering if it was just me.
And again, right, there's something to be said. Maria and I just had a call around similar questions like, well, why haven't you guys raised more money, right? The question is always, for what and at what point, and what are we trying to prove at a particular milestone, right? And so again, just because on paper the company might be worth X, right, that doesn't mean that you're actually executing properly, right? And I do think that the fundamentals of actually, I love your word of defensibility, of a defensible business will come back, and if it's not here already, honestly, right? I think the stuff that we're still seeing as far as the deals, I think it's kind of, I'll say, leftover, for lack of a better term, right? But let's see. Let's switch gears from DTC maybe to kind of your thoughts on VBC versus fee for service. And we've been talking about VBC for ages and ages and ages. I thought I saw, or like less than very small percentage of payments in US are actually tied to VBC. I don't remember the number.
Value-based care for our.
Yeah, sorry. Well, the 17 million people that are watching this show, they all know what VBC is.
But one of the primary uses of this is we're training ground for my employees. They
Okay.
But yeah, so what's your thoughts on that? Sorry to interrupt, Joe.
I mean, everybody's talking about value-based care is the way of the future, but I think particularly if you're looking in the commercial space, value-based care is very few and far between. And I think what we've seen is a lot of arrangements where it's a value-based kicker, and that kicker tends to be pretty small. So if it's, you get paid 5% of your overall revenue based on achieving a certain patient outcome, you're still going to operate like you're in a fee-for-service model, because that's 95% of your revenue. You're not going to focus on the 5%. You're going to focus on the 95%. And it's, Eugene, I think it was like a statistic that only 10% of payment is true value-based. And it's, there's upside payment, downside payment. If it's just an increase, then people just hope that their care model that they're going to deliver standardly through fee-for-service is going to get them a little bit of bonus on the upside, and they're not even taking any downside risk. And so I think that there's a lot of talk, and a lot of people are talking about it, but there's not really much action. And people can quote these, X% of our contracts are value-based care, but they're not value-based care in reality, because it's such a small percentage of the overall payment that's actually tied to value. And I think a lot of these health systems, they're really starting to think about this too, but value-based care basically means if you're going to try to drive value and reduce costs in certain areas, those are going to be specialty care areas. And that's where these massive health systems derive the majority of their revenue. And so they're going to be cannibalizing their own revenue for this value-based care system. And if it's split, that savings is split between the health plan and the health system, then they're going to be just reducing their revenue overall, and it doesn't make any sense for them. So until the incentives are really shored up, I don't really think we're going to see much progress, at least from the large brick and mortar health systems.
Especially as we're seeing more and more of, a health plan is also a health system, and a health system is also a health plan, right? I mean, it's.
Right. But how would you want, so you have VBCK, the value-based kicker system, whatever, the value-based kicker system, but it is like, how are you supposed to operate that way? Like I've seen that in some of my contracts and some of the, where it's not even value-based. It's not even that really. It's almost just hey, if you get these results, almost more kind of a little bit raw, kind of results focused. But the idea that you would have a critical company doing, critical infrastructure, and have them possibly go to a loss, isn't that dangerous?
100%. And I think that's one of the reasons a lot of payers won't give startups capitated risk, because if they operate at a loss and they completely go under, then who's now financially responsible for, the losses that has been incurred. And so I think we're still a long way, even in the startup world, from true value-based care. We have people like Oak Street and the companies that are similar to that. But really, if you look at what they did, they operated in a fee-for-service model, but they operated at a loss while they were collecting the data to show their overall total cost of care cost savings and validating that their model worked. And then they were able to flip the contracts over to true value-based care contracts. And that takes a lot of guts to do something like that, because you're not operating for, seeing exponential revenue growth, which is what investors really like to see. You're really trying to sell people to say, if we are able to build out this value-based care model, then we will be able to achieve these savings. And that's, a next layer of sales that you have to do to an investor or to a health plan to be able to get them to buy off on that. So I think it's a long and arduous road to get there. And I commend the people that are actually doing it.
I have one more. I mean, I have a bazillion more questions for Joe, but I think I want to focus on one. We talked direct to consumer. We talked kind of the payer health plan, which in theory, if you as a company have shown good outcomes, it is in the interest of a health plan to push you to communicate upstream to the members because it works for procedure X, et cetera. Let's talk about employers, right? We talked about engagement, the whole PPM model, and I know you and I exchanged, some docs and things like that on upstream engagement. Want to know your thoughts, because from an employer perspective, I don't know the stats, but some of it is, well, we need to provide this for our employees, yes, but then there's other things that are kind of more of check boxes, and that whole chain of communication to the individual employee, from the bazillion, startups and companies that are out there. I'll pause and hand it off.
Yeah, I mean, the Livongo really made the employer channel famous, I think, but it's still not a perfect channel for all the reasons that you just highlighted. And I'd love to share battle scars about this, but it's hard to drive enrollment of your solution, whether it's through a health plan or through an employer, because ultimately they have a finger on your customer acquisition, and they can kind of control the communication cadence because everything has to go through them. And so if they throttle your communication, then all of a sudden your revenue for that account is significantly throttled because you can't enroll more members. And so it is really, really difficult. But I do think if you're operating in the commercial space, it's a very, very important channel. About probably close to 70% of commercial and health plan members are in a self-funded arrangement right now. And so it's the majority of the market when you're talking commercial. And so you have to figure out how you're going to be able to penetrate that at some point. I think we have people that are doing really innovative things on the smaller group side. So companies like Nice Healthcare are targeting more of that 30% and trying to get in on the fully insured book of business. But it's still hard, but you're going to have to figure it out at some point if you want to get to scale.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Well, we can keep taking. I love chatting with you, Joe, just because I think you're tracking a lot of this and applying this kind of in your own growth paths as a business. But why don't we? I think I'm gonna go to Jim Joyce and his final question of the day, because otherwise we're gonna take up hours, honestly, here.
Yeah. Okay, so you picture yourself. You're in snowy Minneapolis. You're walking through. You're walking through the alleyways. What's the
skyways?
The skyways.
It was like the alleyways.
Your skyways. Yeah, you run into an old friend. You go back to Duke. You're watching a basketball game. I'm drifting here, right? You're at a basketball game, and you bump into this incredibly charming, kind of aspiring young entrepreneur that has just left, one of the big med tech companies and thinking about starting a new company. And he's completely impassioned with a personal healthcare problem that he's just helped solve for a family member that he loves dearly. What advice would you give to that young entrepreneur that's launching a digital healthcare company?
I think the thing that I wish I did earlier was just start sooner. So I think I waited. I love the entrepreneurial world. I don't think I'll be able to ever leave it, but I wish I got into it sooner. You have such a big opportunity to really make a difference in patient outcomes and actually impact people at scale. And I think that opportunity alone to impact people is completely unparalleled compared to any other opportunity out there. And like I mentioned, that's my North Star. And I wish that I'd had the guts to take the dive earlier.
So go early.
Go early. Go big. Just do it.
Go early and go big and make a huge impact. Love it.
Yes.
On that note, Joe, thank you for joining us, and to the millions of followers and viewers, share this out, hit subscribe or pass it on, and we'll hopefully see you next week. We're going to try to stay consistent for the season finale, Jim Joyce. Next week is season finale. All right.
Wishing you the best, Joe. We'll see you on the Twitter sphere.
Great deal. Thank you guys so much.
Take care.